Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center and Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org. Edina Eye Physicians and Surgeons, a division of Twin Cities Eye Consultants, has proudly served the Twin Cities for more than 55 years now in 7 convenient locations. Using the most advanced technology combined with human touch, Edina Eye offers comprehensive services and dedicated specialists committed to excellence with innovative procedures and expertise for the most advanced eye care.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Access to Democracy. I'm Steve Francisco, your host today. It's a real pleasure to welcome back to our studio the person who holds the distinction as being our most frequent guest on Access to Democracy. And of course, I'm talking about Minnesota State Senator Jim Carlson. Welcome back, Jim.
You always say that about most frequent. I'm not sure if that's true.
I think it is. It's like frequent flyer points. You get extra points for every appearance. But thank you for being here. We have a lot to cover, so we're going to jump right into it and hope that we cover a fraction of what we'd like to talk about today.
Good. Yeah.
We are witnessing in our country, very sadly and tragically, a pandemic, and I'm not referring to COVID, I'm referring to a pandemic of mass shootings in our country. Over 200 mass shootings defined as more than 4 fatalities per incident, including the recent horrific shootings in Buffalo, New York, Uvalde, Texas, and just the other day in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I understand there was also a shooting in Iowa last night. The shooters in Buffalo, Uvalde, and Tulsa used these AR-15 high-capacity assault rifles. Minnesota law currently requires a permit to purchase handguns, and if you want to carry a concealed weapon, you can do that too with a permit that you apply for. In Minnesota, you have to be 21 years old, however, and have a permit to buy an assault weapon such as an AR-15. Is Minnesota law adequate with respect to these particular types of weapons used in these mass shootings, the assault rifles, or do we need to consider, as many have proposed, raising the age for purchase or possession from to 21 in all circumstances?
I think 21 is a logical extension of the let's say restriction to purchase. I also think that, as the president said yesterday, it's time for us to recognize that this weapon is a people killer. It's not a hunting rifle. It's something that is intended to kill people. And perhaps either it should be restricted more, for instance, like automatic weapons, or banned entirely like we had back from '94 on.
The so-called Feinstein Amendment from, I think it was '94, and had a sunset provision. Congress wasn't able to extend it in 2004.
Well, they didn't want, George
chose
Bush didn't want to.
Right, chose not to, yeah. And those types of weapons, we should be very clear, as you said, not for hunting, but just as we have seen in these mass shootings, their capacity to murder large numbers of people in a very short time. Magazine capacities firing bullets at over 100 bullets a minute. Nobody needs that for hunting.
That's right, yeah.
And so we need to move forward on that. How about some other reforms that we could be looking at too at the state level, such as red flag laws that allow the judicial process to intervene, judges to determine whether or not someone is mentally fit to own a gun, checking the backgrounds, closing the gun show loophole that doesn't allow background checks for private gun sales or gun show sales. What's your thoughts about those?
Well, I'm absolutely committed to passing something that's a universal background check, even for private sales. So we need to get something like that, because too many people that should not have a gun, are ineligible to have a gun, and let's say they know that they can get firearms through straw purchases or other ways.
Right.
They should all have a background check first.
Right.
And it should be a comprehensive one. And maybe some people don't know that there's several levels of background check that you can get. The common one that can be done goes through what they call National Instant, it's NICS, the NICS system. That's a really very low level one, because a lot of states don't bother reporting things to the NICS system.
So there'd be a way to develop this, but I've heard some critics on the enhanced background check saying, well, you know, it's too complicated, we can't really do this. I refuse to believe that a country that landed men on the moon and brought them back can't figure out a foolproof background check system so that we keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I just found out 2 days ago that if you want to go into Egan High School or one of the elementary schools, and you don't have any children in that school, you have to provide your driver's license. They put it into a reader that checks to find out if you're in a sexual offender
I didn't even
database.
know that.
I didn't know that either.
Wow.
And if you choose to be let's say an in-class teaching assistant, you have to have a background check. If you want to coach softball, you have to have a background check. If you want to be a bus driver, background check.
Right.
All of those. And if you want to have a permit to carry, you have to have a background check.
Right.
So why do we have people that are just absolutely refusing to say we need to have a background check for an AR-15 or some firearm like that?
And you referred to the president. Last night, President Biden addressed the nation and called for sensible reforms. He's not for confiscating all guns, something they accused former President Obama of, which is ridiculous. They never proposed confiscating all guns.
That's right.
What they're saying is, let's look at those reforms that we can enact, which are supported, by the way, by over 80–90% of the American people, which that tells me there's both Democrats and Republicans that support those types of reforms. Let's look at those and do the things that makes the most sense.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise we're leaving our society and our kids in school. School should be the safest place kids are, not one of the most dangerous.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
and you know, we asked that question in the Senate and the House State Fair surveys, and it always comes out that it's between somewhere around 75 to 90% favor those two, the red flag and the background checks. So it's really overwhelming, and yet we can't get some people to admit that this is a safe thing to do.
and we should acknowledge too, because of the way people travel in our country and move around, really leadership on this, we need national leadership from the Congress, but there are things states can do, including Minnesota, that need to be done. So
Yeah, there's a lot that we can do.
Right.
Quite a bit. We have some, let's say, I don't want to call them lax, but let's say they favor the gun owner. I mean, I own guns.
Yeah.
You know, and
my family did too.
And I don't want them. You know, I don't want to have to go register them. But you know what? We're getting to the point where, what kind of, let's say, slight thing that you need to give up to save the lives of a lot of people. And that's where we're at now. You know, I'm willing to have a little bit of inconvenience so that we don't have a Buffalo shooter again.
Right. Well, we talk about, people are very quick in our country, and with reason, to talk about their rights. We're very proud of that. We're the freest people in the world. But with rights come responsibilities.
That's right.
And the fact is, none of our rights in the Bill of Rights or in the Constitution are absolute, including the Second Amendment. So says our federal courts and the Supreme Court. So we're talking about trying to move forward someday on some reasonable regulations.
That's right.
Let's change gears here. Every session of the legislature, and you are a veteran now, you are in your fourth term, finishing up your fourth term in the legislature. You've seen it all by this point, I suspect, Jim.
Yeah, I'd like to say no, because I'm still learning. The learning curve is still steep.
Good to be learning new things. But I'd like to talk to you about a mix of issues today, if I may. As with any session, some things made it to the goalpost, other things didn't, and you'll have to revisit. Let's start with Hero Pay. That's in the done category. What happened with Hero Pay? Who's it going to, and how much are they getting?
Well, I'm not sure of the entire list of who it's going to, but let's start out with the Republicans didn't want it at all. They wanted nothing. And then the Democrats came up and said that, and of course the governor did too, that we have to provide something to these people.
When
who
we
gave
say
up
heroes,
so much.
we're talking about nurses,
First responders.
firefighters, police officers, people who had to work through the pandemic
Right, yeah, they
at
didn't have a
risk to
choice.
their own health.
Yeah, they had no choice. Now these are people who did not get unemployment. You know, they weren't like teachers who would have the part of the year off anyway. So there were people that did not fit the categories. And there is, if someone wants to see the categories, there's a website that has that where you can look at all of the details about how a person qualifies for it, and you can apply right then and there.
Right. The information I saw online was that in late April there was an agreement, $500 million, $500 million in checks to workers on the front lines. And they figured that about 667,000, give or take, Minnesota workers are eligible for checks up to a cap, I believe, of $750.
Yeah,
so this was really important to do for those workers who went through great hardship, and that got done. Yeah.
Yes, it did. Yeah.
Let's talk about something that didn't get done. As many of our viewers know all too well, Minnesota was projected at one point to be running a budget surplus of up to $9.2 billion, and which is a remarkable number. I think it was a record estimate for the highest projected budget surplus ever in the state's history. And of course, Democrats and Republicans, as always, have different ideas how to spend that. There was a deal at one point to cut $4 billion in taxes, including elimination of the state taxes on Social Security. Minnesota, I understand, is one of only 12 states that tax Social Security. But at the last minute, these cuts didn't get passed. Can you tell us what happened there? Why didn't that happen?
Well, that's part of the larger discussion. There were, and what I have heard from our caucuses is there were 19 important bills that we had to pass. Now, we passed a lot more than that.
Yeah.
But 19 important ones, and we got 14 passed. And the 5 that didn't get passed were transportation, taxes, bonding, education, state gov, and elections. Now, some of those are dependent on the tax bill because you can't pay for things in some places if you don't have the revenue.
Have the revenue.
Yeah,
Right.
and I do want to say something about the projected surplus too, that we didn't expect that. That's a windfall, a massive windfall.
Says something good about Minnesota's economy, doesn't a lower than average unemployment rate, a vibrant economy?
Yes, absolutely. High corporate income. So there, those, and I would say that there were 4 things, and they had different contributions, but high corporate income, high personal income, because people had jobs that didn't have them before. People got promoted. People said, hey, I don't like this low pay job. I'm going for a higher pay job.
Right.
And that was not anticipated.
Right.
And then when they got this new job with more money, they went out and bought something. And that raised, and they bought a taxable item. So the sales tax collection went way up.
You know, this raises a good point. I often hear people say, and I'm sure you've heard this too, that Minnesota has a terrible business climate, that businesses are fleeing our state. I don't think that seems to be true. In my neighborhood here in Eagan, I have a lot of neighbors who have moved to Minnesota from North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Wisconsin, other parts of the country, and they're coming here because we have a very high proportion of Fortune 500 companies compared to other states. of similar size or even bigger than Minnesota. So it can't all be as bad as some of these people are saying.
It's not. You know, we've been saying that South Dakota is much better than Minnesota for many years. And what I've always said is the people that move their businesses to South Dakota, they're generally low technology, assembly jobs, things like that. And it's only because they can't afford to go to China. So,
and I would also point out they don't have nearly the level of social services. They don't have as high a proportion of their population with health insurance. They don't have as high a level of educational achievement as Minnesota. So it's sort of a mixed bag on some of this.
Yeah, and also South Dakota, by the way, there are no large law firms. There are no large banks headquartered there, except the ones that went to
the
Sioux
credit
Falls.
card companies went there, but
because of the governor gave them a special deal.
Christy
But
don't.
if you want to buy a Ferrari, you have to go to a place in in Sioux Falls that sells Fords and Ferraris. So you know, there's a lot of things that are different.
didn't know
than
there were
here.
any there. Let's move on to another subject. This is in the dung category, and I think it's a really important piece of legislation on unemployment insurance. You know, we all know that during the pandemic, a lot of people lost their jobs because business cut back, people weren't spending money. The legislature was divided on a lot of issues, but on this one, they seem to have reached agreement to spend $2.7 billion to cover the federal debt and to replenish the unemployment insurance fund. And we should say that that fund is financed by payroll taxes on employers. So by doing this, the legislature actually helped a lot of our businesses out, didn't it?
Yes.
By helping them avoid having taxes to replenish the fund.
There's two things that happen with unemployment insurance tax, and that is that there's a flat amount based on the maybe the industry or the you know, just the income of the employees. But then there's another amount that gets added to that if that business has a high claim rate. So you get
Called
that,
their experience rating.
The experience
right?
rate. And in this particular case, that bottom level would have just skyrocketed because that's the amount that is required to tax employers so that they rebuild the fund. And the moment that we saw what the forecast was, I told people that wrote me, I said, I'm absolutely for that, for replenishing that. So, you know, because
Which had bipartisan support, we should add too, right?
It did,
some.
but for some reason, there are some people that object to everything.
Yeah. They might object to what time of day it is,
Yes,
who knows.
yeah.
Education in the category of not done, I think you mentioned that earlier, Jim, that an education bill didn't get done. We should point out that there was money in education for student mental health, special education, and literacy programs. What happened there?
Well, now I'm not on the education committee, so I was not, you know, not there for every word.
Yeah.
But literacy was a term that was grasped onto by the Republicans, and they said, we have to fund literacy. And their first bill that was offered in the Senate had $30 million in it for the entire state. And it was only for literacy, and it was only for hiring an outside company to come and teach literacy in schools. Okay, it didn't take, you know, that long. It didn't
Maybe
take long.
sounded better than what it really was in terms of what it would have done getting help to people who need it.
Yes, yeah. So it didn't take long for the governor to say, wait a second, you know, don't even go to first base with that.
Right. And the governor's a former teacher.
Yes, that's right.
Mankato.
Yeah.
And your wife is a former teacher,
That's right.
Gail.
And we had this issue in the background where, you know, there's a formula that's per student that goes to every school. Okay, and then that formula also includes special education students, and it also has some funding for special education that might be federal and state. And the problem is that the feds, they never promised it. They just implied that they were going to fund special education by 40%. But they've never been over 18%. And so where does that money have to come from? Because that's a mandate. It comes from the formula for regular education. So they take money out of regular education and put it into funding special education. And the term for that is cross-subsidy. And so what happened in Minnesota is every district is now in very tough shape because of that cross-subsidy. This district that we're sitting in right now is 196. The cross-subsidy is $23 million.
Which
now,
doesn't go far in a district this size.
No, that's just the cross-subsidy.
That's interesting. I seem, when you mentioned the federal promise on proportion of money that they pay, I seem to remember there was a Broadway musical years ago called Promises, Promises.
Boy.
It sounds good, but it actually is better when you actually deliver the money and not
Yes.
just the promise.
Yeah.
So interesting. Let's talk about reinsurance real quick, which is in the done category, something that got done. What was the reinsurance legislation?
Well, it's a system that reimburses insurance companies when there are certain large claims from, not claims, but costs to people that have significant injuries, significant illnesses, that sort of thing.
So it's on health care.
It's on health care, yeah. And it protects the insurance companies from having to pay these large sums of money for a small number of people. And we said that it was going to be only for 1 year a few years ago, and now it's almost continuous. And what John Marty, the way he describes it is, why do we have to insure the insurance companies? Aren't they supposed to insure themselves? Why does the state have to take that?
But then again, too, isn't part of the incentive here, they extended 3 years, more than $700 million. It's also so insurance companies won't drop people so that they are left without insurance?
Kind of, except that the ACA has that mandate that you can't just drop
No,
people.
that they can't just
That's
drop
right.
them.
You,
That's
you
right.
can't drop you, and they can't deny you from insurance if they ever had a picture with you smoking a cigar.
Right.
Which they used to do.
Right.
So,
Infrastructure, in the category of not done, I understand, there was $1.4 billion for public infrastructure projects included in the end of session framework deal, but that didn't pass. What types of projects would this money have funded, say here in Egan and Dakota County and statewide? What are we talking about?
well, fortunately, unfortunately, Egan doesn't ask for much. We don't have a lot of big projects
We're
here.
a pretty developed community.
We're pretty developed and we're pretty stable. The only project that I had, or let's say there were a couple of projects, they were the Veterans Greenway that goes across and will connect with the bicycle and walking trails that are over by 494 and Highway 13. And it was just a rather
That's the ones
modest
that go
sum.
over Fort Snelling State Park, right? Over the freeway there?
Yes, yeah, that's that one, yeah. And it comes from the Mississippi Greenway, which is actually, eventually will be a greenway all along the Mississippi up to Duluth. And it goes across the Munger Trail and all that sort of thing. So we asked for money there, and we got, well, we haven't gotten anything yet, but it's going to come at a much lower rate.
Yeah.
Now, in Dakota County doesn't ask for much either. And that it's a frustration for me that we ask for some things and we make a request, but then that request gets cut back.
I remember a few years ago there was a lot of opposition to a bonding bill from Republicans at the legislature, which was really hard to understand because we'd had a bridge fall in Minnesota, made worldwide news. We have other infrastructure, highways and bridges crumbling. And at the time for the state to borrow, as they would have, the interest rates then were low. So why wouldn't you pass a generous infrastructure bill at that time when it would have been less expensive than it is now?
Yes, yeah. Well, in 2020, that was the situation. We had a terrible high unemployment rate, and we had an incredibly low interest rate. And so we had contractors that were underbidding just to keep their doors open. They wanted to keep their companies going, so they would underbid. And now I'll give a precise example. Several years ago, we had the bus garage in the car garage at the bus station in Apple Valley. That was estimated at a certain number, and because we had such a recession and the interest rates were so low, we went quickly for it, and we actually got an additional level on it just because of the competition, and the bids came in much lower than we expected.
Wow.
So yeah, and I went to that garage the day it opened. the day that station opened, and you couldn't find a place to park. It was full already.
I want to ask you, we're starting to run low on time, several other issues I want to hit real quick. I understand the legislature took up the issue of student data privacy this year, that there was a last-minute deal to crack down on how tech companies can use student data and prohibiting them from selling such data to marketing companies. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I was only involved in part of it, and I actually objected to the bill that they had because it allowed students and parents to opt out completely of any databases. And what that meant is the student couldn't have their picture in the baseball, with the baseball team, because that's part of data. It's stored as data. They couldn't do anything through the school district that required them to be on a database. And
Without
I said,
explicit
you got to
permission.
fix that.
Yeah,
And,
and they hadn't in this.
And they hadn't until we complained about it significantly. And we did get the bill through, and it was passed. But yes, there's a couple of
Little glitches here
I
and there.
could dig out my phone here and pull up something with a particular company that supplies one of these software programs. And if you put your student's name in it, they'll sell your information. And one of my friends actually, she put in some fake names. She put in Peter Rabbit, and she has an offer from the University of Nebraska to Peter Rabbit and his family for a scholarship.
Oh my. So some glitches that maybe can be addressed next time around.
Yes. Yeah.
Public safety, despite the fact the governor and legislative leaders called for making public safety a top priority, weren't able to reach agreement on a bill. There are big differences between Democrats and Republicans over issues about police funding, about the role of nonprofits in helping reduce perhaps the need for police responses to every situation. So are we going to see that issue coming up again in the future?
Absolutely, we will.
I would guess so.
Because the difference, primarily, in just a few words, is that the Republican response for public safety was to increase incarcerations, and the Democrat one was to try to find ways to hire more police.
Okay. We're going to end on a positive note, which is, I understand there was a deal on the sale of growlers, talking about changing the liquor law. What happened there in 20 seconds?
Oh, gosh. Well, we loosened the requirements substantially. A lot of our beer laws are related to prohibition, and we're just way behind.
Trying to catch up to the modern era. So now I understand the deal lifted production caps on the state's biggest breweries, allowed small breweries to sell cans and distilleries to sell one full-size bottle per customer to take home. So just trying to bring our laws into compliance with modern times. Jim Carlson, state senator representing Eagan, Burnsville, Mendota Heights. Thank you for your service in the legislature representing us. We hope you continue there. Thanks for your work and being our guest today on Access to Democracy.
Thank you, Steve.